Hey everyone. This is Marguerite here. Today I have Jason Sichkaryk, Director of IT at Rosno Transport and President of the CIO-CAN Association in Edmonton. And today we're going to be discussing a project that we did last year to help the CIO-CAN Association move from no online strategy to reach out to potential CIO-level members to 145 new connections and 8 sales meetings, 58 interactions, 8 sales meetings within approximately 45 days with that audience. So, but you know what, I'm going to get ahead of myself a little bit. So I really want to hear from Jason. So let's kick it off with you. If you wouldn't mind just briefly introducing yourself and the work that you do at CIO-CAN and in particular with the project.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I've been the Edmonton chapter president of the CIO Association Canada for coming up on 2 years. When I started, and I guess some context is it's primarily an association of volunteers. So in my role, I'm a volunteer. I have about half dozen to 10 board members working with me at any time. There's a few other chapters from the major municipality centers in Canada. And really the whole purpose of the association is for us to network with our peers, with senior executive IT leaders, for us to, discuss and help each other overcome challenges. We're a not-for-profit association, and a lot of the revenue that we get for funding chapter activities comes from annual memberships. And so it's important for us to have a stable base of members. We're constantly trying to figure out what is of interest to members. How can we continue to deliver good value to them so that they'll continue being a member? And as well, we're always trying to expand our network and attract new members. And we can go into, I think, the challenges.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, exactly. So that's perfect segue, actually. Before we started working with CIO-CAN, how had you been getting new members in the past?
Well, so primarily, especially before the pandemic, it was old school. It was meeting people at events. It was, seeing people at coffee shops in the downtown corridor and just kind of striking up conversations, really, especially at non-CIO Canada conferences. Like maybe we'd go to a Gartner conference or a, Dell or Microsoft conference, and you'd sit at a table with someone and say, oh, hey, well, I'm also in the CIO Association. Why don't you maybe come check it out and join us at our next event? And that for many years for the history of the association was the sort of go-to way that new members were attracted to the association. And with the COVID pandemic, with everything going online, we really lost that. And we seemed for a time not to have any way to be able to figure out, well, who else is out there that might be a potential member.
Perfect. And what were you thinking? What were the main frustrations that you had as a leader in this project in thinking about how to go from this model, the traditional model where you met people mostly live, to not being able to do that, not being able to have these interactions, in-person interactions? What was that main frustration? What was that like?
Well, so for me personally, what was frustrating at the time was I really felt there had to be an easy way to figure out who our target market could be. For us, it was pretty easy to define. It's senior IT executives in Canada. And I didn't at the time understand why it was so difficult for us to figure out, like, who are those? In my mind, I had assumed that a simple brainstorming exercise of even just sitting around and thinking about some of the major companies in Canada and the major public organizations should have at least led us to a list of, well, those are the organizations And certainly if we were to go on social media like LinkedIn, we should be able to find some of those people. But as a volunteer, that seemed like a daunting task on my own, and especially to try and organize some of the other resources in the association. So that was definitely on my mind as a source of frustration. I didn't know why we didn't have a good vetted list of prospects. And then as well, I had a sense that we should be able to reach out to these people in a similar way in which we had been in the pre-COVID world, which is just introduce ourselves, strike up a conversation and say, hey, I'm in this association. I think it's really great. It's adding value for me. What do you think? Here's an invitation to join. And for whatever reason, we just could never get that going.
What other kinds of projects did you do? I know that the CIO Association has been around for quite a while, and you've done other types of outbound marketing. What was happening with that as you were considering moving?
Yeah, so before this project, I hadn't been involved with a large multi-chapter coordinated effort. But there are two things that stood out to me. One was just our online marketing in general. It was strange to me that we weren't really taking advantage of LinkedIn. It didn't feel like we were. I'd personally go on LinkedIn, and I'm a member of the association, and I'd go and look at my LinkedIn feed once a week or so. And I wouldn't really see a lot of posts from fellow members, and I really wouldn't see content from the association. Nothing that really stood out to me in a usual way. And like that always kind of stuck in the back of my mind. But as a chapter president, it wasn't really within my purview to do anything about it. And then other projects that I would be doing at the chapter level, and a lot of chapters would be doing, is our local events. So we would sometimes just do casual get-togethers with members, but sometimes we would do more formal, like knowledge sharing or peer networking type events. And those were also difficult to coordinate amongst volunteers. And then especially if it was some sort of like new experimental type of event, it was difficult to try and get a quick decision made at the broader level. And then even when we did go and finally get an event like coordinated, it seemed more difficult than it should to get the word out about it. And especially what always sat on my mind was every single good event that we're doing is an opportunity to make non-members aware. And we always seem to be missing the mark on that. And we were only able to like advertise those events to already existing members. Right. And we were losing out on the opportunity to influence potential members.
And what about other organizations that were targeting your types, the members? Okay. What were they doing that you guys were not doing, and you saw some, what were some of the frustrations there?
It didn't. Yeah, I guess it didn't frustrate me, but now that you ask, maybe it really did. But certainly the persistence was one thing that stood out, right? We do on certain levels compete with like other professional associations, other professional marketing firms. Certainly, IT executives are a sought after bunch. And one thing that our competition was doing much better was just persistence. Like if someone wanted me as the IT director of Rosenau Transport to attend an event, they would ask multiple times. And they would, even if I would say, no, I'm not interested, they would follow up, a few times to make sure, until I was very, direct about it. And that persistence I would find, usually had an effect on me. I would dismiss something almost immediately. It's kind of what I would do by default. And the persistence would sometimes get me to pay more attention. And that was a stark contrast to the approach, we were using at the CIO Association. We would invite someone once and then, oh, that's it. They'll either get back to us or not. Right.
Right.
Of
Right.
course,
So,
the challenge being we're volunteers. Most of those are paid associations, but still it stood out to me of like, we're not entirely volunteers. And why couldn't we maybe not be as persistent, but be somewhat persistent?
right. Right. It's more of a marketing piece, right? So moving from this traditional approach where it's more one-on-one, non-pressured environment to more of a marketing online, especially with the changes and with COVID, right? Yeah. Okay. So I was brought in to start talking about it. What piqued your interest about the LinkedIn approach? Initially when we first started talking about how we could address some of these challenges?
For sure, the quantified and fast way to be able to figure out the market demographics. I probably can't overemphasize that enough. I mean, I'll just keep in isolation Edmonton as a market in and of itself, right? So, I mean, if you're not familiar, Edmonton's a city of about 1.5 million people. It's the provincial capital of Alberta. So there's a fair number of provincial government organizations. We have some big companies. We have a lot of mid-sized companies. We have a lot of small businesses. It's certainly not the size of Toronto or Vancouver, but not a small city. There's a lot of businesses here. There's a lot of IT. And what had always stood out to me was, why do we only have like 40 members? There's got to be more than 40 IT leaders in Edmonton. And that even of itself really stood out to me is how come I don't know how many IT leaders there are in Edmonton? And I mean, I had crazy ideas previously, like I'm just going to drive around or I'm going to go on Google Maps and I'm going to like catalog like every single business. And, if I think their revenue is over a certain amount a year, then I know there's a certain IT aspect there. And I know there's a certain amount of IT leadership. But that just seemed crazy to me. And as soon as we started talking about leveraging LinkedIn and some of the tools behind the scenes, I knew immediately that there was going to be much more ability to do things differently than there was before. And we found out almost immediately right away that what seemed like previously a huge monumental problem was now almost easy. It turned into do a search. We had the ability to look for titles. We had the ability to narrow the geography range. And that was a huge game changer of just being able to go and quantify, well, what's the size of the market? How many targets are there in it? And to shift it suddenly to not even being aware to, we can actually go and pre-qualify some of those and determine if we even want to talk to them or not.
Right, right. I mean, LinkedIn certainly did give us that ability to take that big number and even narrow it down further. And I think one of the comments from one of the team members was that they found companies they'd never heard of before in the market. They never even knew that they existed. And they were large companies, but they didn't even know that they had facilities in that area. And it was an incredible exercise just from that perspective, as you just mentioned, right? Okay, so now we're talking about going out to them. And what did you see was different about going out to them using LinkedIn as opposed to other methods that you might have chosen?
So that was a huge eye opener for me. Most of my experience with like marketing before had not been as targeted, like Google ads and Facebook ads, where you cast like a really huge wide net and you hope people just stumble across you and they're interested. This was really intriguing to me because, we were like already targeting the people that we wanted to join. And it totally shifted my perception to, oh, wow, do we even actually have like a value proposition that is going to be intriguing to these people. And I think in hindsight now, I can say I certainly totally glossed over that part. Being a member of the association, and I think the association is great. I thought it was going to be really easy. We spent a little bit of time on like our initial offer that outlined our value proposition. It felt like such a no-brainer to me, and it seemed like such a good price. I thought it was going to be a slam dunk where, oh, wow, we have these people, we know who they are. We're going to contact them and they're going to sign up in droves is what I thought. Right. Turned out not to be the case. Mm-hmm. But what was, I think, maybe this is jumping ahead, but what turned out to be, I think, one of the more fascinating and valuable pieces of this approach is we were actually able to start collecting data about, the value of our offer in terms of these prospects. So,
right.
I find myself being one of the people that is saying the people that connected with us and said, no, they're not interested, are almost as valuable, if not more so, than the people that did say they were interested.
Correct. So there was quite a bit of learning in this process about what people were looking for and when.
Yeah.
And if you remember back to some of the comments, right, we had 58, at least last time I checked, 58 engagements, right? It's 145 connections, 58 people interacted, okay? And of those 58 people, the comments were quite interesting and telling of their interest level and their approach and even their use. Actually, if we go back, our conversation first started with, I don't think that CIOs use LinkedIn, if you remember that, right? Way back when. So we know that they do to a certain degree, right? And that they are there and they will respond. Yep. So if we think about so one of the things that we learned was definitely more about the market, more about what was interesting, more about the timing, okay, how people respond, what they got interested in, okay. What do you think was what would you think is your ROI on this? From a time and investment perspective? I mean, yes, we got the connections. Yes, we got some meetings. The sales weren't there, honestly, in the initial piece anyways, at least in the short term. I think the long term was there. But what was one of the big things that we took away from this?
Man, that's a really good question. That's a super good question. I find myself as like an IT professional almost always having to quantify that question. And certainly there are so many in the association that have done that and said, well, there was no ROI because we spent X number of dollars and we didn't hit our revenue target. I am strongly of the opinion that the intangible value that we discovered here is so immense, we don't even realize it yet. To use an analogy, it seems like we spent some money on a metal detector and we found a huge, massive seam of gold. We scratched the surface and we figured out, oh, geez, we're really going to have to get out and start digging. But if we do, and we put in the work and the effort, it's a gold mine. Like more tangibly said, there's so many good outcomes that have come out of this. And
it was a relatively short period of time. And I think this is one of the key things one of the key learnings is that, we gave ourselves, less than 2 months to get to a goal, right? Which,
Yep.
in any sales process is very, aggressive. Okay. But we did actually hit some really good milestones in that period of time, as you've alluded. But, what would you suggest, like, as far as the long term? So you're alluding to this longer term learning, this longer term approach here, right? So
Yeah.
even just from that list of 452 that you identified in that region were top CIOs or top IT professionals in that was of a certain revenue level, et cetera, right? So you were very, very specific about who you wanted to go after. Where do you see this? So the ROI in 45 or 60 days may have been there, but where do you see the ROI maybe in, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months?
Yeah. So there's a couple key things. So in no particular order. At the conclusion of our initial project in December, myself and a couple other people, we knew that we hadn't been able to, conclusively demonstrate a hard quantified ROI in terms of dollars.
Right.
I really strongly felt we were just getting started. And so one of the things we were able to get approval for was to continue our testing in Edmonton. And so we've started that. And there's really a couple key things that I think we're going to want to keep working on in the future. One, first of all, is the whole prospecting process in the first place. Like being able now to go on LinkedIn and get a list of all of the potential members in Edmonton or any geography is really helping to add definition to who do we want as members and who do we not. That was something we try and define a senior IT executive. It was sort of nebulous before. Now we can kind of quantify it. We can go and look at, and we're not quite there yet, but we can go and look at someone and say, that person we do want to target because of reasons, and we don't want that person because of other reasons. That's huge. That's helping us really add some definition to who we are and who our members are as an association. Secondly, the next thing, I'm going to jump ahead to the end and then I'm going to come back. The main thing that we want is new members, right? So now we know we have this kind of process where we start with a list of targeted prospects. We know how to get that. We know somewhere at the end, we're going to be able to get people to say, oh yes, this sounds great. I'm going to join. Right. The part in between just seems to me like the really huge, great opportunity to iterate and squeeze value out of it from couple different high level points. One of which is we're going to have people, and we're seeing this, that right away say, no, I don't want to join you because of X reason, right? To name an example, we've had a few people say they're fairly senior executives saying, no, I'm paying for a much higher subscription to a managed tight peer group, and I really like that. And we can say, oh, well, that's good. That's some information about our competition, and that's some information about what really senior executives are looking for. Then we have, another class of individuals that says, oh, that sounds really interesting, but I'm really busy and my time is valuable, and we, the association, need to demonstrate to them first that we're not going to waste their time, that we're going to be, providing them with value. So those types of people we put into a follow-up category. There's a whole secondary process there that we have to figure out of, how do we feed drip campaigns to these people? How do we stay in touch with these people? How do we keep them engaged over time so that eventually, the timing is right for them and they say, hey, yeah, you guys look legit. I want to check you out.
You're going to continue to use LinkedIn to do that as well, right? To do those drip campaigns and to take them offline, do offline and online.
I hope so. I mean, that's another sort of, that's another thing we have to figure out as an association of volunteers with limited resources. How do we do that efficiently? Like we sometimes, and I think a lot of organizations are this way, in the early days of trying to do something, we're cobbling it together on spreadsheets and manual labor. And that I feel is, entire conversation for another time of like, that can sort of kill your ROI because it's not necessarily efficient. You have to dump a whole bunch of labor into your process in order to get the outcome you want. And that one, I feel like if we spent a certain amount of time up front, sort of automating part of it,
Right.
we'd really be able to squeeze a better ROI out of that process. And that's something what we're doing with the follow-up in Edmonton. I want to better quantify and queue up for later. And that's a good segue into like the next part, which is we're still trying to figure out, what's the most cost-effective and even most effective way for the association to do the engagements from LinkedIn. And we've had two sort of maybe not opposing, but two definitely distinct viewpoints, which is it maybe should be actually us, the members, using our own LinkedIn profiles, doing the engagement.
Right.
That's more, some people say more authentic and more genuine, but it's way more time consuming. The other approach is, let's just have a sales professional act on our behalf and go and have those engagements themselves. It costs hard dollars to pay someone to do that. And, we need to figure out, well, which way works best for us. And the interesting benefit of that is, me personally, I don't think one way is conclusively better than the other. I think there's pros and cons to both approach.
I would agree. I think that, it's interesting. So when we first started working together, we did that initial process of thinking about your business, thinking about your offer, thinking about your niche, how we were going to go after it, doing that deep dive into the database, sorting, selecting, finding, right? Cleaning that up. So that was a job in and of itself, right? And then we moved into thinking about how we're going to go and, connect with these professionals. We did a couple of iterations, which I think is quite interesting. So we kind of did a direct model, and then we used more referral model, and we used different people. So at the end of the day, we have a couple of different perspectives on how this works. But I just want to take it back to the fact that when you use LinkedIn, it's not usually done as an organization it's done individual to individual. Okay. And I think that that's a really interesting and key thing that, we're still testing. Does it make a difference from to have it appear CIO to a CIO as opposed to a salesperson to a CIO? And I think that that's an interesting thing. And I love to hear some more as that sort of unfolds to see if it makes a difference, pros and cons to both. But definitely with the salesperson, at least they know what it is. The example when I believe who did the other one for us? It was who did it? It wasn't you who did it. It was
Ellen in Toronto.
No, with the Sean.
Oh, Sean.
Yeah. So when he did it, so when I set him up on the LinkedIn process, he went direct to people as a membership director, and I think that he had a really good response. Actually, people knew exactly what it is that they were talking about, or he wanted to talk to them about, and it went really well. So it's an interesting process, and it was very iterative. I guess that's kind of what you learn as you do.
Yep. Yeah. Like if you recall, when we first queued things up in September and October, we set some hard rules for ourselves, which is our association members themselves cannot do any of the work because they are constrained by their day jobs and other priorities. And then that's why we made the choice to go and hire someone to act on our behalf to do the work. I think that was extremely beneficial. The one thing we learned is that there were some people, and these are not isolated individuals, that are not comfortable with having a sales professional utilize their LinkedIn profile and have someone appearing as themselves, right? So then we had Sean go and as himself go and do the same engagements. And that's what we're doing in Edmonton now, is myself and 5 other people. We are, through our LinkedIn profiles, we're targeting people directly. We're attempting to do the work of a sales professional. And what I believe at this moment, our conclusion is going to be, is that I think a third way will be the more successful way, which is a sales professional as themselves acting on behalf of the association to start the conversation, and leveraging individuals like myself and Sean as maybe touch points or referrals. Because,
Correct.
yeah.
Correct. Because you're right. Because it was an iterative process. We were learning
Yes.
as every sales process, especially when you have never done it before, right? It's a learning exercise. So I think that's interesting. And certainly I think anyone who's listening to this would probably want to hear how this turns out for you as you transition from different models, right? Going direct as individuals, using a salesperson on behalf of the association. But I have a feeling that will work just as if it was someone else. So I have some other suggestions for you afterwards, and I'll share that with you. Okay, so as far as this approach, would you recommend it for anyone else who's looking to going after C-level professionals, just starting off their journey?
Oh yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, I even have made the recommendation internally at my day job that I think this would be a really beneficial approach. And so when I'm speaking now of, say, a mid-size, like, private organization that has its own sales and marketing efforts, I would really recommend that this be given some consideration. I mean, this is a really, I would say, fast and effective way to target some of those high value customers that you might be interested in. And more importantly, using LinkedIn, you can go and find the decision makers, and you can sort of skip right to the person that you need to be talking about for whatever product or service you're trying to entice them and sell them. And unlike with blanket sort of non-targeted approaches, one of the most beneficial things you'll get out is that quantified information about why they're not interested in this time. Whether it's either not at all, that's valuable, or, oh, not at this time, that's also extremely valuable.
Right. Awesome. Well, that's great. I'm glad that there was some learning and that there's a long-term ROI. It's not short-term. It's multifaceted long-term ROI, as you mentioned earlier. So if you were to say the one piece of advice for organizations that are looking to go from maybe a more traditional model, okay, of reaching out to customers to online, what would that be?
I'd say the biggest thing is probably that you really have to make the commitment, I think, to be in this for the long haul. From my experience, you're unlikely to see immediate results, and you have to go into this with a mindset of constantly adapting. And I think in each situation, it'll be different, like how many iterations it takes for you to, like, really feel successful. And even then, I would advise not to be complacent and just let things run on autopilot for a while. I really think on an approach like this, you really have to set up a framework for yourself from the beginning to, at a certain interval, take a step back, learn what you've accomplished so far, and make plans for tweaking and readjusting.
Excellent. And when you were doing this offline, so the one-to-one, how long would it take you to get to a customer? If you were to think about it, is it faster, more effective doing it online? Or if this was back to our normal pre-COVID world, maybe this is a better way of asking it. Would you go back, right? So let's assume that we're able to go back to our regular conferences and networking, et cetera. Would you go back to that model? Is that a more efficient model for you, or is this a more efficient model for you going forward?
I think I would go back to it, but I wouldn't stop the online either. Like, right. We're humans. We really like face-to-face, genuine interactions. And like, there's value in that. And I certainly wouldn't want to dissuade people from doing that. I think we're always going to be growing, but there were huge blind spots in that approach for us. There were certain segments of the market that we just never would have stumbled across, right? Like if you think about, for us in Edmonton, and I think this is similar way, we were really only targeting whoever was downtown, in the downtown core. And we were ignoring, organizations that were in industrial parks and in other, business zones, right? We would just never would have run across them. So yes, I think we'll sort of go back to that, but we absolutely will not give up doing it the online way either.
Awesome. Great. Well, I'm so excited. I'm grateful. I'm thankful that you have found value in all of that work. If people want to find out more about the CIO Canon Association, where can they find you?
On our website, CIO-level.ca. They can look me up on LinkedIn, and CIO Association of Canada on Google will yield a bunch of results as well.
Perfect. Awesome. So I just want to say thank you so much, Jason, for this time. This has been amazing. Thank you for being genuine and honest and open about it, because, it was a really interesting journey, and it produced some immediate and hopefully long-term results for you, certainly as the organization matures and their online journey. So I just want to thank you for that. Hopefully it's useful for other people as well as they're considering their own journey onto LinkedIn. Okay. So thanks again, everyone. Bye, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks. Take care.